Hello, welcome to Brooklane's Facebook Live presentation, Understanding Transcranial Magnetic Stimulation, or TMS. I'm Kurt Miller, Community Relations and Education Manager for Brooklane. I want to share with you information that we have on our website on a number of different mental health programs and services that we have available, as well as on YouTube. We have our previous Facebook Live programs available as a resource, and you can simply go to brooklane.org to access those. And those are there on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions during the program today, I would encourage you to put them into the comments. I will see them and be able to relay them to our presenter. Please just simply type them in and that will work. And we certainly do appreciate you joining us for our presentation tonight. Brooklane is offering transcranial magnetic stimulation as a new service to our range of programs and services that we provide. It is a non-invasive and well-tolerated, and it's a treatment that's available on an outpatient basis. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Michael Hahn, is with us to share about this innovative and cutting-edge treatment. Dr. Michael Hahn received a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry from the University of California, a Master of Science degree in professional science with a concentration in biotechnology from the Middle Tennessee State University, and a Master of Business Administration in healthcare management from Florida International University. He also earned his Doctor of Medicine degree from Florida International University's Wertheim College of Medicine. Dr. Hahn, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us today.
Thanks, Kurt. I appreciate it. All right, I think we'll go ahead and pull up the presentation. In the meantime, I'd just like to say thanks to everybody for joining the Facebook Live and for watching our video. I'm Dr. Michael Hahn. As Kurt mentioned, I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Brooklane. I'm very excited today to be chatting with you all about a new service line that we have just recently brought online at Brooklane as of this month, and that is our transcranial magnetic stimulation service line, in particular deep transcranial magnetic stimulation, or deep TMS, in conjunction with BrainsWay. That's a very exciting new service line, and it represents an expansion of our capabilities to treat, in particular, treatment refractory major depressive disorder, which we'll talk about. But it's an exciting time in the development of the field. It's an exciting time at Brooklane because we're able to bring this new treatment modality to our patients here in Hagerstown and throughout Western Maryland. So we'll talk a little bit about what transcranial magnetic stimulation is today, or TMS. We'll talk a little bit about its history, some of the science behind it, and then really what it offers to folks who are experiencing, again, what we call treatment refractory major depressive disorder, or major depressive disorder that hasn't responded to more classical treatments such as psychopharmacology or therapy or a combination thereof. So Kurt, next slide, please. All right, so in the realm of psychiatry, we have a variety of non-pharmacologic treatments that we've been able to offer to help treat a variety of conditions, not just major depressive disorder, but things like bipolar disorder, psychosis, neuroleptic malignant syndrome, et cetera, a wide range of conditions. The first of which was ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy. And this treatment emerged over the decades and was FDA cleared in the late 1970s from the observation that patients with epilepsy experience transient improvement in psychiatric symptoms that they may or may not have been occurring after the completion of a seizure episode. So ECT emerged as a treatment, a non-pharmacologic treatment, to directly stimulate the actual neurons in the brain with the goal of improving psychiatric symptoms. Now, the way that ECT worked is it delivered a direct electric current to the brain. And that was very, very effective in resolving a number of psychiatric symptoms. If you remember what the brain is a large organ. It's a massive tissue that really functions as a neurochemical messaging system, right? So the neurons of the brain actually communicate with each other via electricity and electrochemical signals. So by delivering a current to the brain, you can kind of deduce how that can directly stimulate some of the functioning of the brain with the hopes of seeing some improvement in psychiatric symptoms. And ECT is a very effective treatment. It's actually one of the most effective treatments for a variety of psychiatric conditions. And we see a lot of positive things with ECT. For example, return of neuroplasticity, or the ability of the brain to modulate and grow and change, enhanced secretion of brain-derived neurotropic factor, which can help with, consolidation of neuronal pathways and things that can help the brain recover from psychiatric illness in particular. So that's ECT, and ECT is wonderful. There's some pros and cons to ECT. ECT is very well tolerated. ECT is very safe, but it does require anesthesia. So ECT is a service that requires the patient to be sedated, to be put under general anesthesia. And in that way, it's a little bit more it impacts the patient a little bit more with the fact that they have to come in, go under sedation, receive the treatment, recover from the sedation, and then kind of go back to their day. Most patients are able to return to their day after recovering from the anesthesia. With ECT, there is also some possible amnesia-like effects that can happen. Usually, it's limited to around that small period of time around the time that the current is delivered, and usually it's very minor, very well tolerated, especially the way that we do ECT in the modern day. But as the field has looked into ways to continue to achieve the benefits of ECT, being even less invasive, having even less impact on patients, that's when the field began to evolve and to look at the world of transcranial magnetic stimulation to achieve similar effects to ECT, but again, even less invasive because it doesn't require that anesthesia, it doesn't require that sedation. So what exactly is transcranial magnetic stimulation? If we break down the word, transcranial means going through the cranium. So we're using a magnet, and it's a powerful magnet. It's not a static magnet, so it's an electromagnet. The magnets work when a current is passed through them. And when that current is passed through them, a magnetic field is generated. And because electricity and magnetism are related, when a focused magnetic pulse is delivered to an organ such as the brain, which works via neurochemical messaging, like we said, and that kind of electrical basis to the brain, we're able to stimulate neuronal activity. And if you look at traditional TMS, our TMS, or repetitive TMS, came out, was FDA cleared in 2008. And that was one of the kind of first evidence-based, tools that we had in addition to ECT to do direct neuronal stimulation to regions of the brain with the goal of enhancing the activity of those regions and thus leading to improvement in neuropsychiatric symptoms. And so our TMS came onto the scene. Again, FDA cleared in about 2008, and we'll talk about the differences between traditional TMS and deep TMS. But traditional TMS essentially involved a very focused and delivered magnetic pulse to a particular region of the brain in order to stimulate that region. Flash forward about 5 years, and there was FDA clearance for deep TMS. Deep TMS involves the same concept, but instead of a focused pulse, it uses a much deeper and broader magnetic kind of current signal to stimulate a broader and deeper area of really the frontal cortex in order to, again, get that direct neuronal stimulation. The benefits of TMS being that it's done while you're awake. It's done not under anesthesia. Very few side effects with this. As we get into the data, which we'll show in a bit, has achieved some very impressive results with regard to, in particular, treatment refractory major depressive disorder. So that's deep TMS, and that's a little bit of the history of what we're looking at with some of these non-pharmacological treatments for psychiatric illness. Next slide, please, Kurt. So this is something that's important for us to talk about. Major depression at its core is a brain disease, and this is really a neuropsychiatric concept. There are certainly, and anybody that's in the field of psychiatry, psychology, social work, therapy, etc., everybody can appreciate the biopsychosocial approach that we take to conceptualizing depression. There are psychosocial factors that impact and can trigger a depressive episode, etc. What we are looking at from a TMS perspective and from a psychiatric perspective, and this is inclusive of those factors, is the fact that when somebody does experience a major depressive episode, there is tangible physiologic changes that occur in the brain. And MDD in itself does boil down to true, from a biological perspective, a brain disorder, and it can be very difficult to treat, in particular treatment refractory major depressive episode, when you are not addressing the biological aspects of the illness, in particular what the brain is experiencing there. So just if you look at the slide, so just as diabetes is a disorder that affects the pancreas and a number of other symptoms, MDD as its core is the biology of that. There is a neurochemical impact on the brain, and that's something that we would want to treat in as best a way we can, and TMS gives us a tool to do that. Next slide, please, Kurt. So treatment-resistant depression. So there was a large trial, it's kind of a landmark trial actually, that occurred several decades ago at this point, called the STAR-D trial. And amongst a number of other things, what the STAR-D trial tried to do was to see the effect of sequential treatment via antidepressants for the treatment of depression, and to see what the response is on that. And a number of other things. STAR-D accomplished STAR-D gave us a lot of data on a lot of aspects, but one of the core things was that it let us appreciate what the algorithm of antidepressant treatment could look like and result in, and what we can expect as a typical treatment course. And one of the things that's the most concerning outcome that we learned from STAR-D is the fact that if folks are treatment refractory, meaning they do not achieve remission or response of their depressive symptoms in the initial trial, that it becomes less and less likely with sequential trials that they will achieve that response or remission that we're looking for. And unfortunately, more and more likely that patients would experience the side effects of medications in order to achieve that response and remission. So this is obviously a big challenge, because there's a large portion of the population that do not respond on the first trial of an SSRI or an SNRI, do not respond initially and require a second, third trial. And that's why it's inherently to our benefit, in order to get patients to response and remission of their psychiatric symptoms as quickly as possible. Next slide, Kurt. This slide is really just kind of demonstrating the same thing. So with subsequent trials of antidepressants, the side effect profiles became worse, and the response rates became less favorable as well. So this is not, these last two slides are not meant to speak negatively of psychopharmacology. Psychopharmacology is really still the core it's still the basis of how we treat major depressive disorder, you know, in addition to therapy and the psychosocial aspects of treatment. But this does represent a limitation of psychopharmacology alone, and has kind of spurned the search for non-psychopharmacologic tools that we can use to directly stimulate those neurons that have diminished firing, diminished response in the face of a major depressive episode. Next slide. There's also some benefits for using non-psychopharmacologic techniques, either in conjunction with or in lieu of pharmacological techniques, and that's the side effect profile. So the way that medications work, typically they're taken by mouth, they distribute through the bloodstream, and there is no targeted way that once taken by the mouth and distributed through the bloodstream, that medications can only go to the organ or target of interest. So most of our interest in treating depression is to target the brain, but there's no way for a PO medication or a by-mouth medication to selectively and only reach the brain and not anywhere else in the body. This is how we get side effects. And that's why really any medication that we take, there's always the risk for side effects. So insomnia, blurred vision, fatigue, dry mouth, all things that can happen with any pharmacologic intervention. Now, TMS therapy is a non-pharmacologic intervention. It is targeted, just like ECT for that matter. So we can specifically and selectively target the organ of interest. That's the core to the pathology of what is being experienced. If you look at the slide here, it says scalp discomfort, headache as well, kind of being some of the main possible side effects of TMS. There is a rare possibility because TMS is dealing with stimulation of the motor cortex, in particular to find that motor threshold, that seizure can occur as a side effect. But that rate is incredibly low. In fact, it's around 1 in 30,000 or so. So in the large FDA trial that BrainsWay, the manufacturer of our Deep TMS product, underwent, it was a response rate, it was a seizure rate of 2 in 10,000. So incredibly rare. So this goes to show that maybe not in lieu of, but in conjunction with psychopharmacologic therapy, that there's a lot of advantages to a non-pharmacologic or interventional therapy such as TMS. Next slide, please, Gert. So, and lots of evidence. You know, this slide is just to tell you that we're at a stage in the data and within the literature for TMS that we have multiple peer-reviewed studies, many RCTs, comparison studies out there. These sham control studies, what they do is they would put patients in a machine that has a similar feel, sound to a TMS machine and observe the response of symptoms, and they found a significant difference that folks that actually received TMS compared to the sham or the kind of fake machine actually did improve quite a bit with regards to their major depressive disorder. A very robust and ever-expanding basis in the literature for the use of TMS. Next slide, please. And a long history. So the first time we really started to look at magnetism as within that side of the electromagnetic treatment, remember, electromagnetism, two sides of the same phenomenon. So by using a magnetic pulse, we are affecting the electrical stimulation of neurons in the brain. And the first time that folks thought of that were really back in the 1980s. You can see from this slide here, Barker, Georgia et al., you know, kind of looked at using magnetism and then repetitive stimulation via magnetism, or RTMS, you know, as a concept. In 2000, the H-coil concept came into effect and started to be used in research. We'll talk a little bit about that, but what the H-coil is a particular design of the coil such that when a current goes through, the way that the magnetism of the coil is delivered you get kind of broad but focused magnetic stimulation for a targeted region of the brain. That's in conjunction to the figure 8 coil that was kind of the classic or traditional TMS, which you can see there. In 2008, that was FDA cleared. That figure 8 coil gives a very focused pulse, whereas in 2013 and beyond, the deep TMS is more broad and deep in terms of the regions of the brain that it can stimulate in order to again, try and alleviate those psychiatric symptoms. Next slide, please, Kurt. So we've been talking about this, but how does it work? Electrical currents flowing through the coil will generate a magnetic field. That's what, that's just, if you recall your physics, anytime you pass electricity through a coil, you're going to generate a magnetic field. And those magnetic fields will wind up at 90-degree angles to each other. So by setting up your coils in a certain way, you can actually target the field that will stimulate the electrical activity in the brain in a targeted way, and that will help the cortical neurons, or the neurons of the cortex of the brain to stimulate. One of the things we'll show you in the next slide is that with fMRI studies, we've been able to identify that in folks experiencing significant major depressive episodes, they actually have decreased neuronal activity in the frontal cortex and regions of the frontal cortex as measured by fMRI that's linked to the depressive episode. So the goal of this is to kind of wake those neural pathways back up by directly stimulating them. And that does things like promote neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the concept where the brain can actually repair and grow. Not too long ago, we thought that the brain, once formed, was static, that it stayed the same and that it was done. We have learned, in particular in the last 10 years, 15 years or so, that that's not true, that neuroplasticity is a real thing, and that with the right lifestyle factors, the right treatments, that we can achieve and sustain neuroplasticity, and TMS can be helpful with that. So next slide, please, Kurt. And this is just kind of a demonstration. So these fMRI studies, what they do is they put folks in an MRI machine so they can take pictures of the brain, and they can actually look at kind of blood flow distribution in the brain, and we can see with blood flow what regions are being activated and not. So when folks are experiencing depression, you can see in the figure on the right that greener, bluer color means that there's less activity going on there in the frontal cortex of the patient there that's being imaged, compared to somebody without depression, which has much more activity in that frontal part of the brain. So the goal is to energize those neurons again, to kind of bring them back in order to help alleviate some of these depressive symptoms. Next slide. And here's some of the data that you can see with this. So TMS shown multiple large random control trials, just some of the kind of data you can look at from the different studies. This one is citing an RCT study back in 2015, but if you gaze your attention to the charts at the bottom, you can see really significant response rates from TMS compared to sham trials, and not only response, but response to folks who have failed 1 to 2 or 3+ medications. So this is really a mechanism that you can deliver true relief to patients who have suffered for quite a bit, experiencing treatment refractory depression, knowing that each trial of these medications might take 6 weeks or longer or so. So by moving to an adjunctive treatment such as TMS early on in the treatment course, you can actually make a significant impact, positive impact in the response of patients over time. Next slide, please, Kurt. And what we're learning is that deep TMS in particular, or the H1 coil versus the classic figure 8 coil, deep TMS in particular is actually proving to be even that more effective in getting some of those responses. So, you know, if you look at this slide, what this is basically kind of demonstrating is that there are benefits to being able to generate reach neurons deeper in the neocortex and in a broader area in order to activate some of those neuronal circuits that can alleviate depressive symptoms. Next slide, please, Kurt. So this is looking at traditional TMS again, but it's versus deep, but it is highlighting an important point, and that's durability. So if you're looking at response and remission is, you know, complete resolution of symptoms. Response is improvement in symptoms, but not necessarily total resolution. But what the data from this particular trial is showing is significant durable response. So a number of patients, a significant number of these patients were able to not only get results, but sustain results for at least a 12-month period based on the CGI, which is wonderful to see. So next slide, please. So again, just some of the advantages that we're looking at the H1 coil. It's broad and deep. So again, you're hitting more of the neuronal circuitry in that prefrontal cortex. And by doing that, you're achieving that greater span of neuronal stimulation. It's also, just from a practical perspective, the treatment protocol is about 20 minutes, which is pretty manageable for most folks. So for a treatment course with TMS, usually we're looking at about 30 sessions at least, with a taper period of 6 sessions following that 30. So it's usually a Monday through Friday. What we like to tell folks is that you should really plan on setting aside a month. But again, that doesn't have to inconvenience your life significantly, because it's a 20-minute period. Usually you would come in around the same time of day in order to receive that treatment. You know, there's no anesthesia. Most folks come in, they get checked in, do their 20 minutes, they're out 10 minutes after that, they go right back to work. Again, while also significantly improving their odds of achieving resolution of their depressive symptoms. Next slide, please. So deep TMS in real clinical practice, looking at the response remission rate. So 20 sessions versus 30 sessions is the goal of most treatment protocols for treatment refractory depression, for that matter. But a 75% response rate for treatment resistant patients is impressive. That's approaching the same level of response that you would see from an ECT protocol. But again, without the anesthesia and some of the potential side effects of ECT, not to downplay ECT, but again, it speaks to the prominent role that TMS should be playing in our algorithmic decision-making when it comes to treating patients with treatment refractory major depressive disorder. Next slide. So again, just citing some other RCTs that are out there. There are many, but looking at H1 coil versus figure 8, this particular study found a much more prominent response from the deep TMS or the H1 coil versus the figure 8 coil with medication. So these are all looking at with medication. But if you look, and this is looking at this trial is looking at treatment refractory depression, measuring MDD symptom severity. I believe they're using PHQ-9, if I'm not mistaken, to measure that. But much more prominent response for TMS in conjunction with medications than medication alone. Next slide, please. All right, and the research continues to be ongoing. So Brainsway right now is the manufacturer of the TMS machine that we have at Brook Lane. They're wonderful partners with us, and they have currently have FDA clearance to treat major depressive disorder, OCD, and smoking cessation for their products. But there is a wide array of research going on right there in the realm of interventional psychiatry, again, looking at direct neuronal stimulation, looking at things like you can see on the slide here, everything from Parkinson's to Alzheimer's. The hope of researchers is that we can use these non-invasive tools such as TMS to improve the lives of folks suffering from a myriad of illnesses. So this is where the research is. We're hoping that these will emerge as targets for TMS or similar interventions in order to be able to provide relief to patients suffering from these conditions. Next slide. This might be the last slide, but so So from a TMS perspective, again, the protocol that we are operating at Brook Lane is to treat treatment refractory major depressive disorder. And that's defined in a number of different ways. From an insurance and payer perspective, usually what they're looking at in order to meet that definition is a patient who has gone through a few trials of therapy, an antidepressant therapy, in addition to therapy, with suboptimal response, and that can be measured by a PHQ-9, a psychometric study, or some other form of outcome. But if there's other factors in the case, that does not necessarily exclude one from TMS. So if an important thing is that if you believe TMS might be helpful for you, have that conversation with your psychiatrist, with your physician, so that way we can all reach out and have that discussion together to see if TMS might be a good treatment modality. There are some aspects that are exclusionary for TMS. Of course, we're dealing with a magnet, so any ferromagnetic or metal-like magnetic objects that are implanted in your body within 10 centimeters of the coil would prevent you from being able to receive TMS. Those are things like stents, oral maxillofacial implants, different things like that. Dental implants are typically okay. Those are not usually ferromagnetic. But if you have implanted metal objects, those may be limiting factors that are preventing you from receiving this treatment. That's the prepared slides we have. I hope you thought this was an interesting walkthrough an emerging realm of psychiatric innovation. I couldn't be more excited for the fact that we got this at Brook Lane. I think this is going to be a step forward for our patients and for the Western Maryland region that we serve. So I'll stop there. Kurt, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hahn. I appreciate your time. As of right now, we have not received any questions. If any folks watching do have questions, if you would please type them in so I can relay them to Dr. Hahn. Thank you. I don't have anything coming in at this point showing any activity for questions. I think this was very informative and a great overview for people, and we certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Have a great day.